Hey, Pioneers! Welcome to episode number 453. Today's episode, I'm actually very excited to share with you. I'm going to be doing a little bit of behind the scenes of what it was like at the red carpet premiere for the Homestead movie. And that's going to be fun. But what I'm really excited about is to talk about what impact watching the movie had and the greater conversation that it should be sparking. One, from those who watch the movie, but two, it's something that I think the homesteading community needs to be talking about on a greater level. So we're going to dive into all of that. So first up, I just got home from getting to go to the early release of the Homestead movie premiere. Now, I have a episode that I did with the author of the books that this movie was based upon. So you can go back and catch that episode if you want a little bit more context and to kind of know more about that. But today I went to Salt Lake City for the premiere, which means I got to see the early release in theaters of the premiere. And at that premiere, almost all of the actors were there. The producers were there. The authors of the book that the movie is based upon was there. And so it was really cool to get to hear their takes. And I have to say that one of the most special things for me about the premiere was actually hearing the actors talk. So I will get into that, but I'm going to back it up just a little bit here. So to go to the premiere, I have never been to a movie premiere. And so I really had no idea what to expect, and was also like, I'm not even sure what I'm supposed to wear, because it probably comes as no big surprise to those of you who have been hanging out with me a while and listening to the podcast. Like, I don't even own a pair of high heels, you guys. I don't know how to walk in them. I can't walk in them. Full story, I actually got married barefoot. No, I was not pregnant and barefoot when I got married, but I did get married barefoot in the church because I can't walk in high heels. I'm actually naturally a klutz. And so whenever I've tried to walk in high heels, I end up like twisting my ankle or like tripping, falling over. And I've never tried to practice it enough to even bother, because when you live out in the country, there aren't sidewalks. And like, there's nowhere I can walk. Like, we're very wet here in the Pacific Northwest, which means my ground is usually saturated. And so if you try to walk in heels, I've actually had guests come to the homestead who have worn heels before, and they just sink. And I feel sorry for them. I'm like, here's a pair of boots, like, just borrow a pair of boots from me. So I can't even walk in high heels, and I couldn't find a pair that I could walk in. And my dress was floor length when I got married, so I got married barefoot. However, I knew I couldn't go barefoot to a red carpet premiere. Plus, it's cold out in Salt Lake in December. So I ended up getting a almost floor length dress. And the great thing is, my brother-in-law is having an outdoor wedding at our farm stay, December 27th. So 2 days after Christmas. However, it's going to be an outdoor wedding, which means it's going to be quite cold. So I was already looking for a dress that was fancy enough that I could wear it to a wedding. And then I got to use it at the premiere too. So it was already lined and floor length, which meant I could wear boots. So I wore my dress boots. They were my black pointed toe dress boots, but I got to wear boots, and I will be sharing photos from the premiere. So if you're listening to this the old-fashioned way, where you're not watching it on YouTube in video format or on my website, which you can find today's episode at melissaknorris.com/453, just the number 453, because this is episode number 453. You'll be able to see the video format there as well as photos. So if you're listening to this like on an app on your phone, just know that there's some photos that we'll be putting in here if you're curious to see these types of things. So the dress was great. I got to wear my boots. Nobody knew I had boots on, and I could feel confident in my walking. And I got to do a kind of a dress rehearsal with the new dress that I'll be wearing to the wedding. And I love when things can serve multi-purposes. I don't ever buy something you can only wear once or for one thing, right? It needs to serve multiple functions. So it was fun to get to dress up, though. I have to say, I don't get to do that very often. So that was really fun. And so what made it extra special is going to the premiere. Josh and Carolyn Thomas from Homesteading Family, which Carolyn is my bestie, my best friend, they also were going to the premiere. So it was super fun because we live in 2 separate states. Carolyn and I are lucky if we get to see each other in person once a year. Sometimes it's 2 years. I don't really count us seeing each other at the Modern Homesteading Conference as seeing each other because we are both so busy that it's literally like we get to give each other a hug and then we're off and doing the things. It's not like we get to really just sit in each other's company. So I was really excited because I was going to get to see Carolyn in person again, and of course Josh, but to see Carolyn. So what was really cool is we arrived at the hotel, and the one of the producers, who's also becoming a really great friend, really cool lady, she messaged Carolyn and I, and she said, "We have somebody here doing makeup. Would you guys want to have your makeup done if we can find time for you to?" Now, I know that's totally not homesteading, right? But I was like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I'm fairly certain I will never get to do any type of red carpet. I've never had my makeup done professionally. And I'm like, let's do the experience. So it was really fun. So Carolyn and I went into my hotel room together, and the really sweet lady came and did our makeup, and that was just a really cool experience. I've never had that before, and she did it very, very tastefully, and so that was really fun. It felt like you're kind of like back in high school or middle school with your best friend and you're getting your makeup done. Like, it was a really cool, surreal experience. Also knowing like it's probably once in a lifetime thing, right? So that was really fun. And both Carol and I were like, "Oh, that looks really good." So that we just had a blast with that. It was super fun and very, very special. It was so unexpected that we got to have that opportunity. So then we go to, so we get a Uber, which I have very little experience. I don't think Uber or what's the other one? Lyft even come out to where we live. So it's not something, the only time I've ever used Uber or Lyft is when I travel. And even then it's very, very rarely. And I still am quite inept at the app. So we got an Uber, except we didn't realize that we had put in the wrong address into the Uber app until she kept driving and driving. And we're like, this is really odd that we would be in a hotel this far away from the premiere. And then we like, maybe we should double check the address. I mean, this is after 20 minutes of driving one way. So we double checked the address and we're like, oh, we put the wrong address in. So we did get there. And unfortunately, by the time we got there, the red carpet, which is so funny because you think red carpet. Now, mind you, this is in Salt Lake City. So I don't know what a huge Hollywood red carpet event would be like in Hollywood versus this, because it's my only experience. But there was the big theater, and inside the theater, there was multiple rooms that they had gotten for this event. So you had to know which theater room inside the theater, like they're numbered, you were in, and you had your seat with your name on it. But you just went into the hotel lobby, which had kind of been, I think, only for people who were coming to the premiere, because I think there was about 200 to 300 people, my understanding, that had been invited to it, plus all of the actors and the producers and all that kind of stuff. So when you come in, there was lines obviously to go to concessions, and then there was also the red carpet. So thankfully it was inside the lobby because it was chilly out. And then they had, which you'll see a picture if you're watching this in video format, and then they had the big, that you stand in front of. It says the movie name, which is the Homestead, and then had some different things like that on it. And with all the lights, like the big lights on stands that's illuminating everything. And then they had a photographer there, a professional photographer. And so you stood in line, and then you would get to walk. It's actually a really small section of red carpet, right? And it's not like there was press, like I don't actually really watch award shows, but what are award shows names? Oh goodness. Emmys, I think, is one where you would maybe see that. Anyhow, it wasn't like that where it was lined with press and like this red carpet was going, yards and yards and yards. It was a fairly small section inside the lobby. And so when it was, your turn, you would walk up, do your photos, and then on and on. Well, how we got there, unfortunately, with our misdirection and address, late. And so they shut down the line for walking down the red carpet to get your photo because it was time to go in and actually start the movie. So we're like, oh man, like part of us were like, do we do the red carpet? Do we not? And then it was like, I am probably never going to have this experience again. Like as a life experience, like let's do the red carpet. So we were kind of, like, we're like, okay, we're going to do it. And then we got there. They're like, oh, sorry, it shut down. And we're like, oh, well, all right. Such it is. So we went and got our seats and filed in. And okay, you guys can laugh because this was for me was like total country mouse in the city experience. For those of you who read that book, had that book read to you as a child. And so I have never been in a movie theater that had recliners, y'all, and heated ones at that if you wanted it. I'm like, for real? Like, this is what wow. And so I was totally playing with the buttons. Like, I mean, like recliner, like you can put it up and you tip back and there's a foot part. And then there's a little tray that you can put like your drink and your popcorn on. I know how I sound right now, fully aware. And it was exactly like that in person. I was like, let me push the button and see what happens. It was very, very comfortable. I have to say, I was highly impressed. Have never been in a theater that had that before. You can tell how often I go to the theater. But so that part was really cool. I was like, wow, like this is like uptown and fancy I'm feeling. So went in and right before the movie started, they had the producers came up as well as both of the authors who had written the series. So Black Autumn, I believe it's an 11-part book series that was co-authored that has done very, very well. And that is what the movie and then the continuing series, which we'll talk about that with you in a little bit, are based upon. And so both of the authors were there. And Jason, like I said, I've gotten the chance to visit with him on the podcast before and get to know him a little bit. He is a homesteader as well. So that was really fun to get to hear how him and his co-author had written the book. But what was really fun is, for me, was getting to hear from them and the producers, the two producers that spoke, how God had worked in their lives to make this come about. So first the book series, and then had aligned the producers to come together to work on this movie and the series, because quite frankly, when it comes to, Hollywood-ish things, that's not something that you get to hear very much. It's very unexpected. And even like that in a large public setting, getting to hear their faith and all of that. So that kind of set the stage before the movie began and was very like I love that. I'm like, I love hearing the surprising and different ways that God is working, especially when you get to go back and follow that thread. So they were talking about right when they first started working together to write book number 1, because this is actually a long fiction series. But like the movie and TV series wasn't even a thought. God knew that it was going to happen, right? So he had started doing all of this work to bring everything together to kind of this moment. And we got to hear that story when you were there in person, which was very cool. So then the movie starts playing on the big screen, and which is always really fun. It's much more immersive, obviously, when you have, this huge screen and the sound that you get in a movie theater is really, really cool. And so the movie's going, and about halfway through, all of a sudden it pauses, like it just freezes, like you hit pause on the screen. And we're like, oh, is there a glitch, or is this intermission, or kind of what's happening? And then the lights start to come on. And so we're like, okay, might be intermission, but this is not just probably a glitch. And so the producer came forward and said, okay, we just realized that this is a rough cut. This is not the actual final version that is playing. And the ending in the final version is different than the ending that would be on screen with this version. And they're like, we have no idea how that happened when this is the actual premiere, but it's going to take them about 15 to 20 minutes to get it switched over to the correct version. And then we would start it where it stopped. So we wouldn't have to like go all the way back and watch it, all the way back from the beginning again. Cause they're like, that part is all the same. It's really just the ending that's different. And of course we want you to see the actual ending. So I was like, yeah, I mean, I have to tell you, not in movie stuff like that, but just in doing, different things like live teachings and in video work for, YouTube and inside my courses and stuff like that, or even on the podcast. I'm like, you can quadruple check things when you're doing a large thing, and then you get to the end and you're like, I don't even understand how that could have happened. Like, we checked this over and over and over again. So I totally understood. I'm like, that stuff, it just happens, right? So, but it was really awesome because in order to help fill the time, they had the main actors come up to the front and we're like, we're going to do a Q&A. So anything that you want to ask the actors, or the producers, like, feel free, and we're just going to do a Q&A to fill the time, which was actually really special because, like, when would you ever really get to do that? But what was amazing is during the Q&A part, a lot of the actors got to start to share their stories and how it had led to them being in this movie, and ended up being testimonials on just the way that God had guided them to this point and to be on this movie. And so for me personally, I am going to talk a little bit more about the movie. But for me personally, as far as the whole like red carpet premiere experience, that was the most special to me, to get to hear testimonies of how God had been at play and at work in making all of this happen. That to me was like the most special part. I'm like, that was just, I think because it's not like I have experience with Hollywood. I'm the same as you guys, like watching movies, right? Or watching television. That's my experience level there. But to just get to hear statements of faith in association with that type of thing, and their stories, just anytime you get to hear how God has worked in someone's life, I always just find it uplifting and so reassuring. Like, I always get something out of it personally, even though it is not my story. So that was really awesome. So they went through that, and then the movie started playing, and so then we went through the whole movie. And at the end of the movie, afterwards, there was downstairs was an after party where you could go and get food, and just anybody who was at the premiere could go and get to actually, talk and to visit. So it was really fun because, of course, Josh and Carolyn and I went down and were able to really talk about, from as experienced homesteaders, kind of our thoughts and things that we were doing, evaluating like our own homestead, which I am going to talk about in a minute, just kind of give you full context. However, after it got done, they said if anybody had been in line for the red carpet and you didn't get to go on the red carpet and you still want to get photos, we're opening that back up so you can go and do it. So we're like, yes, let's go do that before we go downstairs and get something to eat. And so we did get to do the red carpet, and it was really fun. I got to do it with Josh. Carolyn and I got pictures together, and then Carolyn and I got pictures together, and I got a picture by myself. So it was really fun. And all, like, the red carpet part was probably, I don't even know if it was 3 minutes total, because how many different poses do I need of myself standing on a red carpet, right? But it was really fun to have that memento, and to have the photo, and that part was really cool. So then we went down to the after party and had some great conversations amongst ourselves. So Carolyn and Josh and I, and then also got to have some conversations with the producers and some of the actors more on the homesteading level, homesteading movement, that type of thing. So I don't want to do a spoiler because this is going to release the day that the movie releases in theaters. So most of y'all, if you're listening to this right around the time it releases, haven't seen the movie. And so I don't want to spoil it. So I'm going to try to be really careful to be able to share just enough for these points that I'm talking about, but not to spoil it for anybody, because I highly recommend that you go and watch it if you couldn't tell. So premise wise, I also want to say it's not meant to be a documentary about homesteading. So it's not a this is how you homestead in any way, shape, or form. It is totally fictionalized. And premise, so we'll have a link, or if you're listening to this, you can type in melissaknorris.com/angel. Angel Studios is who is producing the movie, the Homestead, in partnership and airing it. So you can go, and that will take you directly to the page that has the trailer, tickets, information, theaters. So you can find a theater near you to go watch it, that type of thing. It also will be going on the Angel app as well. So if you're like, it's not playing in a theater near me or close enough to me, then you'll be able to watch it on the Angel app as well. So anyhow, you could go and check that out. So the premise is there is a nuclear bomb that goes off, and the US is under also the grid on the East Coast goes down. So that's kind of the premise. So you've got, this East Coast has a major thing, West Coast has a major thing. And so there is, in the mountains, there is what they call the homestead, but it's this very large, self-sufficient place by a family that has been making sure they were prepared for some type of event like this. And so they have, greenhouses and gardens. So there's that type of thing in place. But so that's kind of your first premise. And so it follows pretty much three main families in this context. And so there's a lot of, there's a lot of action. It's fast paced. It's pretty quick moving. But one of the nice things is, so I wouldn't say, just because of the action and the subject matter and things like that, like, it's not a movie for young children. But what's really nice is, I would say 13 and up. And it also would probably depend on your 10 to 12-year-old, like, their maturity level and those types of things. So obviously use your own discretion there. But what's really nice is there's no cussing, there's no worries about nudity or even really alluding down that line. You know what I mean? Like, in a lot of movies, you're always like, oh, like, I got to fast forward through this part. I got to skip this part. Like, there's nothing in that part. So that was really nice to not have to worry about that. But there is very much also a talk and thread of faith, which is really cool. And so you see some of these different scenarios playing out, whereas that makes you think, like, okay, if this were to happen, like, these are some different situations you could find yourself in. And so it makes you think, like, what could you do now, or what would you do when faced with that situation? Which I actually think is a really good thing, because I think it's going to I think people will go and watch it because it does have some big name actors in it. Neil McDonough, Bailey Chase, like, it's got some larger named, like, Hollywood actors in it. And so I think that will be a draw for people outside of the homestead niche. But I think it's going to raise, I hope, a lot of people just thinking about things that maybe they haven't thought of before. And like, okay, well, what could I do to put some things in place now, so that if some type of situation like that happened, that my family and I would be better prepared. So for those of you who are in homesteading, like, right, that's usually things that we think of anyways. And so it was really interesting because one of the questions they asked us when we were in the theater, one of the producers said is like, everybody in the theater room, like, raise your hand if you feel like you would be able to go 6 months to a year if this type of situation happened, and you would be fine. And so you can guess, like, the only, like, maybe 2 or 3 people who raised their hand, who they were. I was one of them. And I in the same row as me, Josh and Carolyn. And so that was really interesting. But it was really the movie ends with an incredible amount of hope. And so if you watch just the trailer, that's not necessarily portrayed, because the job of a movie trailer is to get people super interested, right? And to come and hook. Like, it's not going to give the resolution. And so they're showing a lot of the high action scenes and whatnot. So I've had, a few people reach out and like, oh, I don't know, it looks like it's kind of apocalyptic. Well, it kind of is. I mean, that's the beginning premise of it. However, it is very much a story of hope. And I think the greater question that it raises is not only like, what can I do if I was, if these types of situations, I was in them, like, to think ahead of time. What could I do to be prepared or to join them? But it really raises the greater question for me. And this is what, Josh and Carolyn and I really were sitting and discussing this is with your homesteading, you've got your family, which is your first level, like those who live on your homestead, right? But what is the responsibility and what would you do if people in your community, your neighbors or maybe, extended family, if you were truly faced in a situation where you had food because you were homesteading and, had your pantry built up and had food sources, etc. So you had food sources, but people showed up that right? Like we're not even talking about necessarily people you don't know, but people your neighbors, your extended family, people who are friends. If they showed up and they did not have any food and went days without eating and you had food, would you feed them or not? Knowing that you didn't have a way to replace that food because there was no foods left at the stores and supply chains had been disrupted, right? Like, what would you do? And to really sit and think about it. And I think that was really the great thing about seeing this on screen is because they really delved into kind of the wholeness of this. And it makes you really sit and think because you're seeing opposing viewpoints as well, which was, they did a really good job of that, of like, no, like protecting, we prepared, protecting what is ours. I've got to make sure that there's enough to provide for my own. But what do you do when you see your, friends and family and people who are literally going to starve to death and you have food? I think it's a really good question. And I think there's some things that I don't know that we necessarily are going to know till we're in a situation, but I also think that it gives the opportunity to really sit and think about that. Like, what would I actually do in that situation? Like, which one do I agree with? And would I be okay with that decision long term if I did deny and they died or not? And I guess you could say they're kind of heavy questions to ask, but I think we do need to ask sometimes heavy questions. I don't believe in shying away from hard questions and thinking about heavy things. Obviously, you don't want to get stuck in them in a negative way, but I think it's important that we think about these things. And then to take it that next step further, well, what are we doing right now in our communities and as we homestead to build a network of people who aren't going to be relying or worried about starving to death if something did happen? And, it might not be obviously in the scenario of this movie, like that type of thing. I mean, that could happen. Like, let's be honest, there's a lot of scenarios that could happen. Most likely it would be more of a natural disaster. At least that's been my experience when we, of course, everybody has the experience of the pandemic, right? And how that was in some areas was different than others based upon where you lived. But for us, has been more natural disasters. So major flooding, mudslides that have shut down roads. Where we lived, it just wasn't passable. You couldn't get anywhere to get anything, that type of thing. But to really think about, okay, well, what am I doing right now in my actual community to be able to help people or even know what are the skill sets that if needed to be, we could pool together and have that are in my very much geographical location community. That part. Do I actually have relationships with those people in my community? Do I know them? And with the homestead lifestyle that I'm living, are there ways in my individual community that I can help those and be a mentor in my area and in my community and kind of spread the word of homesteading? And could this movie be a way to help do that? I think so. Now, what does that necessarily look like? That's something I've been evaluating and thinking, and it's something that if you're part of the Pioneering Today Academy, which is my membership, we're going to be doing some really fun discussions within the community around this and really deepening this conversation, taking it deeper, which I'm really excited to do. So for those of you who are members of PTA, we're going to be having some super fun discussions on our monthly lives that I'm really excited about, and kind of walking down this path together and thinking about this. And we will have opportunity, if you're not a member, in February, we'll be opening the doors again for new members. Not right now. So just know, like, kind of back of your head that will be coming availability wise. But I do highly recommend going and watching the movie. And the other cool thing is when the movie is aired, there you'll see at the end of the movie, if you're watching it in theaters or if you go to the Angel app, there's going to be a Homestead series. So the movie is really the before, and then it's going to dive into a series where the story continues. And so I'm really excited for that. As far as just storylines and fictional and that type of thing, some of you may know, I actually thought I was going to be a fiction author, a fiction writer. When from the time I was little, I had a literary agent that actually pitched and wrote a number of different fiction titles, which led to, funnily enough, everything that I do now. But I have a great love of story. I really love story. I love good books. I'm highly picky, I have to be honest, because once you've studied something, right? If it's not good, I'm like, I'm not wasting my time. Like, it has to be good. And so I am really excited because they did a really good job in the movie. There's so much backstory with the different characters to be explored and to like really dive in and to see where that leads and connects. So I'm actually probably more excited for the series that's going to come. But the cool thing is the first 2 episodes of season 1 of the Homestead series, TV series on the Angel app is available to watch right now. So you can watch the movie in the theaters and then you can go and watch the first 2 episodes of the season immediately. Now, I've not got to see those first 2 episodes yet because at the time of this recording, they're not loaded yet. It'll be a few more days. So I'm really excited about that. I think it's going to, again, just widen the opportunity for the topic of homesteading. But as long as the homesteading community understands, right, it's not a documentary on homesteading. So though they do show some homesteading things, I don't want to like spill the beans or anything. There is definitely homesteading things that are shown in it, but it's not meant to be a documentary on homesteading. It's meant to be a fictional story. And so as long as you view it like that, I think you're really going to enjoy it. I know I did. And today's episode is sponsored by Azure Standard. So looking at having long-term food storage, Azure Standard is who I use when it's something that we're not producing ourselves. So I use it to fill those gaps. What I love about Azure is I 100% have been able to trust the companies and the products that they have for me to purchase from. In fact, what's really interesting is that we oftentimes will go, not oftentimes, but a few times I should say, I'll go to reorder a product and they will say discontinued because this company sold to a larger corporation or they've started using an ingredient that we don't think is, is good. They've changed their formula or whatever. So I love that they're actually looking out for me because there's only so many hours in a day and research on that can be a lot. So I love that they're keeping an eye on that for me. I really appreciate that. But I also love that I can buy things in bulk. So for dry goods, things that we're not growing ourselves, or maybe, we had a harvest where I didn't have quite enough and I want to make sure that we've got that backup extra. I know I can get it from Azure and I can get it in bulk. They have smaller or larger, but quite often, like I can't just go to my regular grocery store and buy a 50-pound bag of flour or even buy wheat berries most of the time, that type of thing. So I love that Azure has all of that. So pretty much everything in our pantry that we're not growing ourselves, I will get through Azure. And right now, I don't have a milk cow of my own. And so I love knowing that I can get raw cheddar cheese, organic raw cheddar cheese from them, because without the milk cow to make cheddar, you have to have a lot of milk. And so I'll make some of our soft cheeses and cultured and fermented dairy. I'm still purchasing from local dairy of raw milk, but I love that I can get some of those aged cheeses where I'm not quite set up to do that, or just the cost of buying that much raw milk for that in particular isn't something that I'm doing right now, but Azure has that. So Azure Standard is a great resource to have for your bulk food storage, as well as some of fresh and perishable things, frozen goods as well, and herbal supplements. So go to azurestandard.com and use coupon code Melissa15. So that's my name, Melissa, with the number 15. and you'll get 15% off a $100 order or more as a first-time customer. So definitely go and check them out. They are also a great company, and I love getting to support and bring to light places like that. So I can't wait to hear from you guys if you go and watch the movie, what your thoughts are on it, what ways it's making you evaluate the way that you're homesteading, maybe where some holes are in your homestead. We're going to talk about that inside the membership, and I'll probably do a follow-up episode as I have more time to sit and really identify maybe, okay, these are some areas that I think we've got some holes in that I want to plug or maybe improve upon. So I'm still doing that evaluation. So definitely we'll probably do a follow-up podcast episode on that as well. But I didn't want to leave you without a verse of the week. So the verse of the week for this week is, oh my goodness, I always mispronounce this one. So now that I've said it, I will definitely mispronounce it. But oh my gosh. Now y'all know what I'm trying to say. Ecclesiastes 4:9-12. And this is the amplified version. If I wouldn't have said anything, it would have rolled off my tongue. But amen for grace. So, two are better than one because they have a more satisfying return for their labor. For if either of them falls, the one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and does not have another to lift him up. Again, if two lie down together, then they keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? And though one can overpower him who is alone, two can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. I love that verse for a lot of different reasons, or verses, excuse me. That's multiple verses there. But especially in context of what I've been sharing about with the movie and thinking of just homesteading as a whole. And should you, this is another question, and I'm not saying that I've got the answers to all of this, but to think about, should you be putting up some extra beyond what your own family's needs would be, knowing that there will be people who won't be putting up things? Even if you talk to them about it, you just know like, they haven't put up enough. Should I have extra in my supplies to be able to minister and to feed other people beyond what our own needs are? Now, yes, I know that financial things, like there's a lot of things to that. But just the first question of like, should I be doing that? Have I thought about that? Maybe some of you have. I'd be very curious and would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. But this set of verses really, I think, fits it well because it goes back to community sufficiency, which we have a whole podcast episode on, versus self-sufficiency and developing that community sufficiency, because it is very true. It's really hard to do it alone. And most of the time, you're not going to be able to do it alone long term. You will fall, and we really need that support. And so developing that online, I know the community of the Pioneering Today Academy is one of the most treasured things, where we've people of like mind that we can come together and that we can support one another in a digital manner, but also in our everyday lives. So that might be in your immediate household, your neighbors, your larger community. And what does that look like when we would be working together and having a satisfying return for our labor and being able to lift one another up in times of need? That's goes hand in hand with homesteading, or it should, but also just greater life in general. And I think that's the important thing to remember, that you can support people in your community and they can uplift you, even if they're not homesteading. There's lots of different ways that we can support one another and develop community. So it's really good food for thought. As you can tell, my brain is still turning there. So I would love to hear again. You can leave me a message on social media, comment on the blog post that this episode is at melissanorris.com/453, or let me know in a review. If you're listening to this on a app, Spotify, Apple, whatever you happen to be listening to, if you're watching it on YouTube, would love to know in the comments some of your thoughts on this. And I hope that you have a fabulous Christmas and New Year's. And I'm going to be taking a break from the podcast just over Christmas and New Year's, but I will be back here with you in January. and it's going to be an exciting year. So blessings and mason jars for now, my friends.